Welcome again to Grim Captivation, a paranormal podcast. And today we will be reading a quick short story for the spooky season. And today I chose to read from the story of Hansel and Gretel, a tale from the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, near a deep, dark forest, there lived a poor woodcutter with his wife and 2 children. The boy was named Hansel, and the girl was named Gretel. The family never had very much to eat, and now, when times were hard and people around the land were starving, the poor woodcutter could not get enough food to feed even his family. As he lay in bed one night, tossing and turning with worry, he turned to his wife and said, "What is going to happen to us? How can we feed our poor children when we haven't got enough for ourselves?" "Listen to me," said his wife, who was not the children's real mother. She was their stepmother, and she did not care for the children. "Early tomorrow morning," the cold-hearted woman said, "we'll take the children deep into the woods. We'll make a fire and give each of them a piece of bread. Then we'll leave them and go about our work. They will never find the way home, and we will be rid of them." "No," said the man. "I cannot do that. I cannot leave my children alone in the woods, where the wild animals would swallow them up." "Then you are a fool," snapped the woman. "You might as well get 4 coffins ready, for we shall all starve." Then she nagged the poor man and scolded him, and kept at him until at last he agreed. "But I feel so sorry for the poor children," he said quietly. The 2 children were so hungry that they had not been able to sleep, and so they heard everything their stepmother said to their father. Gretel cried, but Hansel whispered, "Don't worry, I will think of something." And when the parents had gone to sleep, Hansel got up, put on his little coat, and sneaked outside. The moon was shining brightly, and the white pebbles that lay in front of the house glittered like silver coins. Hansel stooped and gathered as many pebbles as he could find. Then he tiptoed back to bed and said to Gretel, "Go to sleep, little sister." At daybreak, the woman came and woke the 2 children. "Get up, you lazy bones. We're going to the forest to get some wood." She gave them each a piece of bread and said, "That's for dinner, and you must not eat it before then, because it's all you're going to get." Gretel carried both pieces of bread in her apron, for Hansel's pockets were full of pebbles. They all started out of their way to the forest. As they walked, Hansel kept turning and looking back at the house, again and again. His father said, "Hansel, what are you looking at? You must watch where you're going." "Oh," said Hansel, "I'm just looking at my little white kitten, who is sitting on the roof of the house to say goodbye." The wife said, "You little fool, that's not your kitten. That's just the sun shining on the chimney. Now come along." But Hansel stayed a few steps behind and kept turning, and each time he turned, he dropped a pebble from his pocket to mark the way. When they were deep in the forest, the father said, "Gather some firewood, children. I'll start a fire so you won't get cold." Hansel and Gretel gathered a little mountain of twigs and sticks, and when the fire was burning, the wife said, "Stay by the fire, you 2. We have to go and cut wood. When we're finished, we'll come back to get you." So Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire. After a time, they ate their bread, and after a longer time, they got so tired that they closed their eyes and fell asleep. When they woke, it was dark, and they were all alone. Gretel began to cry, but Hansel comforted her. "Wait until the moon rises," he said. And when the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the pebbles, which glittered like silver coins, and showed them the way. They walked on through the night, and at last, at the break of day, they came to their father's house. They knocked on the door, and when the woman opened it, she was shocked. But she only said, "You naughty children, why did you stay so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming home again." But their father was glad, for it had broken his heart to leave them alone. Not very long afterward, times were again hard, and there was little food to be eaten. Again, the children heard their stepmother say to their father one night in bed, "There's nothing left but half a loaf of bread. After that, we're done for. We must get rid of the children. This time we'll take them so deep into the forest that they'll never find their way back." "But wife," said the man with a heavy heart, "it would be better to share our last bite with the children." But the wife would not listen to him. And after all, once you've said yes, it's hard to say no. So she kept at him until once again he gave in to her and agreed with her plan. When the parents were asleep, Hansel got up to collect pebbles, but he couldn't get out. The woman had locked the door. He got back in bed and tried to think of a different plan. Early the next morning, the woman pulled the children out of bed. She gave them a piece of bread, even smaller than before. As they walked into the wood, Hansel broke up the bread in his pocket and often stopped to throw a crumb on the ground. "Hansel," said his father, "what do you keep stopping and looking back for?" "I'm looking at my little pigeon that's sitting on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me," answered Hansel. "Little fool," said the wife. "That's no pigeon. It's only the sun shining on the chimney." So they walked on, and Hansel dropped breadcrumbs all along the way. The woman led the children deep into the forest, where they had never been before in all their lives. Again they gathered sticks for a fire, and the woman said, "Sit there, children, and when you are tired, go to sleep. We're going to cut wood, and when we're finished, we'll come get you." Later, when it was noon, Gretel shared her small piece of bread with Hansel, since he had left his in crumbs along the road. Then they fell asleep, and as evening came, no one came to get them. When they awoke, it was dark, and they were alone. When the moon rose, they started for home, but they could not find the breadcrumbs, for the birds had eaten them up. "Come, Gretel," said Hansel, "I know we can find our way." But they didn't find it. They walked all night and the next day from morning until evening, but they could not find their way out of the forest. They were terribly hungry, for they had nothing to eat but a few berries. And when they were so tired that they could drag themselves no farther, they laid down under a tree and fell asleep. It was now the third morning since they had left their father's house. They started on again, always looking for the way home, but instead only getting deeper into the forest. Unless help came soon, they would surely die of hunger. About noon, they saw a pretty snow-white bird sitting on a branch and singing so beautifully that they stopped to listen. Then the bird spread its wings and flew before them, as though to say, "Follow me!" And so the children followed the bird until they came to a little house. The bird flew up and perched on the roof, and then the children saw that the walls of the house were made of gingerbread, and the roof was made of cake, and the windows of clear sugar candy. "Let's eat!" cried Hansel. Hansel reached up and broke off a piece of the roof, while Gretel chewed on a wall. Suddenly, they heard a thin, screechy voice call out from inside the house. "Nibble, nibble, like a mouse. Who is nibbling at my house?" The children answered, "It's only the air heaving a sigh. It's only the wind passing by." And they were so hungry that they went on eating. But when the door opened, and a very old woman came out, leaning on a crutch, Hansel and Gretel were so frightened that they dropped the food from their hands. But the old woman just nodded her head and said, "My dear little children, what has brought you here? Come inside and stay with me. I'll take good care of you." So she took them by the hand and led them into her little house. There they found a wonderful meal of hot pancakes with honey, nuts, apples, and cold milk. After that, the old woman showed them 2 little white beds, and Hansel and Gretel lay down and wondered if they were in heaven. Now, the old woman seemed kind, but in fact, she was a wicked witch. She had built her house just to trap little children, and once she had them, she would cook them and eat them. She had bad eyes and could not see well, but she could smell as well as any animal, and earlier in the day she had sniffed Hansel and Gretel coming near. The next morning, before the children were awake, the witch got up and looked at their rosy cheeks. What a fine meal I will have," she cackled. Then she dragged Hansel out of bed and locked him in a cage outside. Then she went back and shook Gretel awake and shouted, "Get up, lazy bones! Fetch water and cook something nice for your brother. Feed him well, for once he is nice and fat, I will eat him." Gretel screamed and cried, but it was no use. She had to do what the wicked witch said. Day after day she cooked pots full of rich food for Hansel, while she herself ate nothing but crumbs. Every morning the wicked witch would creep to the cage and say, "Hansel, stick out your finger so I can tell if you are fat enough to cook." But clever Hansel held out a little bone, and the old woman, who had bad eyes, couldn't tell if it wasn't Hansel's finger. She wondered why he wasn't getting any fatter. And when 4 weeks had passed, and Hansel seemed as thin as ever, she lost patience. "Hurry up and get some water," she snarled at Gretel. "Be he fat or thin, I'm going to cook him and eat him." The tears ran down poor Gretel's cheek as she fetched water and lit the fire. "First we will bake," said the old woman. "I've heated the oven and the dough was ready." Then she pushed poor Gretel toward the oven, where the flames were burning brightly. "Stick your head in," the witch said to Gretel, "and tell me if it's hot enough for us to bake the bread." But Gretel knew what the witch had in mind. She knew that the witch meant to shut her in the oven and bake her and eat her. So Gretel said, I don't know how to do it. Where do I look in? Could you show me how?" "You stupid goose," cried the old woman. "There's a big opening, don't you see? Why, I can fit in myself." And she stuck her head in the oven. Then Gretel rushed up and with all her might pushed the witch into the oven. She shut the iron door and locked it tightly. Gretel did not stay to hear the witch's howls and shrieks. She ran right to Hansel and let him out of the cage. "Come, Hansel, we are free," she cried. "The old witch is dead." Hansel sprang out and hugged Gretel, and the children danced for joy. Then, since they had nothing to fear, they went back inside the witch's house. There they found chests full of pearls and precious jewels. "These are better than pebbles," laughed Hansel as he filled his pockets, while Gretel filled her apron. "Now away we go," said Hansel. Then he said quietly, "If only we can find our way out of the witch's wood." When they had walked for a few hours, they came to a wide lake. "There's no bridge and no stepping stones," said Hansel. "We can't get across." "And there's no boat either," said Gretel. "But look," she said, "here comes a duck. I will ask her for help." So she called out, "Duck, duck, here we stand, Hansel and Gretel on the land. Stepping stones and bridge we lack. Carry us over on your nice soft back." And lo and behold, the duck came over. Hansel got on her back and told Gretel to sit behind him. "No," said Gretel, "that would be too hard on the duck. Let us go across one at a time." And so that is how they did it. When they were on the other side, they walked on for a little while and soon found a path. The forest began to look more and more familiar. At last, in the distance, they saw their father's house. They began to run as fast as they could. They burst through the door and cried out, "Father, we're home!" Then they threw themselves upon him. Since he had left the children in the wood, the man had been worried sick. And as for his mean wife, well, she had died. Now he hugged his children as though he would never let them go. As he squeezed Gretel to him, the pearls and jewels fell from her apron. Then Hansel reached out into his pockets and pulled out handful after handful of treasure. They were together again, their troubles were over, and they lived in perfect happiness for a long, long time. The end. So, I hope you guys enjoyed my little reading of Hansel and Gretel. I feel like it's a nice short story to kind of get into the October spooky season, even though it's not like terribly spooky, I would say. But it has a wicked witch and some dark force and things like that, ominous nature, things like that. So hopefully you guys liked it, and I will be reading a few more stories throughout the October season until we get to the finale of the month, which I hope you guys will enjoy as well. So thank you for listening, and stay tuned for another episode. Bye!